please come in. So lying with your head on a mat, with your head facing that wall and your feet facing that wall. Place here. There are more mats if we need them. Maybe a member of the team could put a few more out if need be. Anyone lost for a mat? If you just like to get a mat from the back and put it down here, you'll be fine. Leave the doors open. Close the outdoors. Thanks. Leave them open. There's a bit of space still down the front for those of you who would like to set yourself up. Down here. Space is premium at the moment. So once you're lying down, just close your eyes and try to relax your back into the floor. Over here. Supporting your head with a cushion, if that's, which would be necessary. You might find it more comfortable if you have your knees up and resting one against the other. Also makes more space for us in the shrine room. So resting your knees one against the other so that they're stable. Maybe feet 12 inches or so apart. And just feeling your body relaxing into the floor. Allowing the body just to become heavy. Taking a few breaths, a few deep breaths. Feeling the breath coming in and out of your body. And then just relaxing. And bring your attention onto your face. See if you can feel any points of tension there, especially notice if your brow is ruffled. If it is, just let it go. Release any tension around the eyes and the mouth. And if you notice you're clenching your jaw, then just let go of it. So the whole of your face becomes relaxed. And allowing that relaxation to spread across the crown of your head, the back of your head, down through your neck and your throat, into the shoulders. If you'll notice that your shoulders are hunched, held up, well, just let them drop. And then allowing that sense of relaxation to drift down through your arms, through the elbows, wrists, and fingers. Making sure that your fingers are not interlocked, because that can create tension. Then bring your attention back up to your chest, allowing the chest to open. Let the rib cage fall either side towards the floor. Let go of your shoulder blades. Just feeling the whole upper half of your body sinking down into the floor. So the upper back is relaxed. Bring your attention onto the spine. And just making sure there's no tension anywhere down the spine. Whatever tension you may find, try to see if your awareness of it can simply dissolve it away. Relaxing the abdomen. If you notice that your stomach is being held tight, well, again, just let it go. Let that too sink down towards the floor. Letting this sense of relaxation, of repose, drift further down through the pelvic region, into your thighs, through your knees, down through your calf muscles, ankles, feet, the very tips of your toes. Allowing yourself to just let go more and more. Feeling the body become heavy. now, just for a few moments, bring your attention back onto your breath. Once more, becoming aware of the breath coming into your body, leaving your body. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Just taking in the surroundings for a moment. And then, in your own time, slowly turn onto your left side, facing the shrine. Taking your time. And then slowly getting up, not getting up too quickly, just taking it easy. And then setting yourself up for the meditation. Getting more mats or cushions if you need them. There are mats in the corner over there. So welcome everyone from me. My name is Devamitra, and also I'd like to extend a welcome to those watching online. We're now going to do a session of the Mindless Briefing, and that'll take us right through to the tea break at 8:15. Just do make sure you've got what you need. Make sure you're comfortable. So settling into your chair or to your cushions. Closing your eyes and withdrawing your attention inwards onto the breath. The mindfulness of breathing. just letting the breath follow its natural pattern. Breathing normally. Allowing yourself to be breathed. last 2 or 3 minutes while still sitting as for meditation, letting go of all conscious effort, just sitting. So now it's time for our tea break. And of course we'll come back in here after that. Apparently I'm going to be speaking about wisdom. Very presumptuous of me. Anyway, hopefully you get a nice cup of tea, cool down outside, do what you need to do. And see you later. Well, welcome back everybody, and welcome back those of you watching online. Special hello to Dasha, who I know is watching. Yes, I'm going to be talking about wisdom this evening. I don't know if you saw the email that went out, but I think there was some reference to Master of Arts and Sciences, which is another example of my presumptuousness, because I haven't even been to university. I'm part of the great uneducated masses. Wisdom, in a way, has nothing to do with education, although there sort of is one could say there's some connection, but I may or may not get onto that. So, wisdom is the aspect of enlightenment which I chose to speak on to this class, partly because for many years I meditated on a figure called Manjughosha, who is an archetypal figure, a bodhisattva figure from the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, who represents transcendental wisdom. And he is represented iconographically as seated on a lotus. He's represented as a 16-year-old youth. Normally we associate wisdom with age, but in this case, certainly in the Indian tradition, he's represented as a 16-year-old youth. And he's dressed in the silks and the jewels of a prince. And he has a sword which he holds up with his right hand. It's a flaming sword. And towards his heart he holds a book, and the book is the perfection of wisdom. So that's just a very quick sketch of the figure of Manjughosha, who I meditated on for quite a long time. And I suppose I was quite drawn to him. I was very drawn to him, in fact, this particular figure. So he's an archetype. He's what's called an archetypal bodhisattva. Now, a bodhisattva is someone who is dedicated to attaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. That's the huge ideal of the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism. So this figure came very much to mind when I was thinking about, well, what was I going to say to you this evening? It took me back to the time that I was doing this particular meditation on his form, because those of us who are ordained, when we were ordained, were given a practice which involves the visualization of a figure like Manjughosha or Manjushri. He has two names, two very popular names, but essentially they're the same figure. Manjughosha means the gentle-voiced one, so that wisdom also has this sort of association of gentleness. It's a voice, but it's also a gentle voice. So for me, when I was younger, he was a very, very attractive figure. I think I was probably particularly attracted by the sword and what that represents. The sword is the representation. It represents wisdom, of course. It's the sword of wisdom, and it's a flaming sword. But it's said of this particular sword that it cuts very, very finely. In other words, it's very sharp. So if you were to drop a piece of muslin on it, it would separate immediately. It has that kind of sharpness to it. This is, of course, all poetry and myth. So Manjughosha is a mythical figure. He has no historic existence. He simply symbolizes wisdom, transcendental wisdom, the deepest wisdom of all. And wisdom is at the very heart of Buddhist tradition. But in saying that, it's important to understand that wisdom is one of what are called the twin pillars of enlightenment, the two principal virtues of the enlightened, wisdom and compassion. And it's said that these two things are inseparable, that where there is transcendental wisdom, there will be universal compassion. Manjushri or Manjughosha is also described as the patron of arts and sciences, hence the title of the theme of my talk, the sub-theme of my talk. But I'd like to start really by bringing us down to earth, because it's really important to sort of try to see how this relates to our own experience and how we can put or begin to put wisdom into effect in our own lives. So, a few weeks ago, actually about 7 or 8 weeks ago now, I went on a month-long solitary retreat. We've just heard a little bit about that from Samantha Vajra, although not about this particular retreat. I was just recovering from another round of radiotherapy, so I was rather weak. Not too weak. I mean, when I was going through radiotherapy 5 years or so back, it reduced me to a wheelchair for 5 weeks, in fact. I could hardly walk. At least I could walk, and I could walk reasonably well. So anyway, I went to Spain, where we have a retreat centre where Samantha Vajra actually was at that time on his ordination retreat. But I was staying not actually in the valley where our retreat centre is located, but just outside that valley, in the next valley, in the most isolated place that we have. And so I went to this place, and something very interesting happened there. Now I should preface this by saying that when I was younger, I did a lot of travel, because I was travelling a lot throughout our movement, which is it's much bigger than London Buddhist Centre. London Buddhist Centre is just one small centre that we have here. We've got centres all over India and various other places, without going into that too much. But I used to travel to most of these centres and meet people. I won't go into what I was doing, but it did involve me with a lot of international travel. And if you've done a lot of international travel, if you travel frequently, one thing that you notice, which is very striking, is the frequency with which flights are cancelled. And you experience just how frustrating that is. And I used to find it particularly frustrating. You get to the airport and you find your flight's cancelled. Maybe you've got another connecting flight. It really is very disruptive. And being in terms of Buddhist psychology, I would describe myself as a hate type. So my natural responses to adversity is one of hatred, confession. So that meant I would get angry. But another friend of mine was doing a lot of travel too, and we were comparing experiences, and he said, the way to deal with that sort of situation is just remind yourself that samsara, that is the world as we know it, always goes wrong. Right? So I took that very much to heart. I turned it into a mantra. Whenever things didn't work out as I would have liked them to have done, I tried to reflect, samsara always goes wrong. It doesn't actually always go wrong, of course, but very often, too often it does. So when I reached this solitary retreat 2 months back, on the second night, I was pretty sure I had COVID. Now I was already weakened by radiotherapy, and now I had to contend with COVID. Now, under normal circumstances, I would have been able to communicate with the retreat team at our retreat centre in Spain, but because I was outside the valley, that proved impossible, because the only way I could communicate with them would have been from my phone. But the trouble was, I was in a house, in a remote place, completely isolated, and couldn't get a signal. So I couldn't contact them. Now, add on to the fact that I was so weakened, for 3 days, I couldn't even get up and make myself any food. You can see the kind of circumstance I suddenly found myself in. And I knew immediately what I had to do. All I could do was just take in the immediate reality, not moan or complain about it, and just relax. It would come to an end sooner or later. Now, by relax, of course, I don't mean relaxing in the way that we did earlier on when you were all on your backs. I mean relax deeply into the experience. In other words, relax in my mind. That's a much more difficult thing than just lying on your back, relaxing your body. But having done a lot of solitary retreats, I sort of slowly learned how to do this. So I just relaxed into the experience. I relaxed into my mind. I allowed my mind just to sort of relax very, very deeply. And then, of course, the whole of the nature of my experience changed. It shifted. In fact, it was quite wonderful. And this is not what you would expect, because on the face of it, there were extreme circumstances. I couldn't look after myself. I wasn't fit to look after myself. I was very, very weak. But there was nothing I could do about that. Absolutely nothing. Sometimes you find yourselves in situations that you just can't change. You can't influence in that kind of way. All you can do is relax into them and not react with complaining and anger and this shouldn't have happened to me, why has this happened to me? None of that. It never helps. So, coming back to my starting point in this particular instance, which is samsara always goes wrong, is one way of saying that the whole of conditioned existence, life as we know it, if you like, is unsatisfactory. There's nothing in life which is ultimately satisfying. That doesn't mean to say that there's nothing in life which is satisfying, but you cannot escape, you can't pass through life without having some unpleasant experience. In fact, most of us have unpleasant experiences every day. Don't we? Yeah, I think probably most days anyway. Maybe if we're lucky, there may be a hiatus. You have a few happy days where everything seems to just go beautifully. I haven't had many of those in my life, I can tell you. But I know people who just seem to go through life in that kind of way. I'm very envious of them. But in a way, I'm also not envious, because if you have to face difficult situations, it's much easier to see that life is unsatisfactory. If you get a cancer diagnosis, since it's been mentioned, it really makes you sit up and think. I've been practicing for many, many years when I was diagnosed with cancer. Diagnosed about 5.5 years ago when I was 68. And, it was quite a shock. But the more I thought about it, the more I realised, well, why is it a shock? You've been reflecting on this sort of thing all your life. Why is it a shock? And of course, it helped me to face the situation, helped me to face the reality that was confronting me. And I think with all the difficult situations in life, this is the best way out, is to just face the adversity. Learn from it, see it as a challenge, rise to it. So I would say that this kind of attitude, and I'm certainly by no means a perfect exemplar of this. I've managed to learn how to do it a little bit. I wouldn't like to say more than that, but this, I would say, is the beginning of wisdom. Now let's go back a few steps further. Buddhist tradition speaks of 3 levels of wisdom. There's the wisdom which is gained by hearing, the wisdom which is gained by experience, and the wisdom which changes your character permanently for the better, which certainly is a desirable goal for me, and I would imagine for many of you. We all have faults, none of us are perfect, and our imperfections cause us pain and suffering. And we have to learn to see that, and learn to face it, learn to deal with it positively, creatively, without reacting with aversion. Our sort of fundamental reaction to life, if you like, is to push away the painful experiences and bring or crave, try to pull towards us all the pleasant experiences. But you can't have the one without the other, it seems. I certainly haven't been able to have the one without the other. I've had many, many pleasant experiences in my life, but I've also had many very unpleasant experiences. But you have to learn to see that this is the way things are in reality. Seeing things the way they are in reality is what we call wisdom. And why we meditate, certainly within a Buddhist context, ultimately is to do just that. Learn to see things as they are in reality. That nothing lasts. Everything is subject to impermanence. Nothing is ultimately satisfying. Everything sooner or later passes and changes. Your experience may change even moment by moment, from pleasant to unpleasant, and back again. That's the way life is. Everything is insubstantial, therefore. There's nothing in it which is fixed. We crave things to be fixed. We want things to remain as they are, as we choose them how we want them to be. But nothing is fixed. Nothing is fixed in life. Nothing doesn't shift and change. So when you lie on your back for 3 days with COVID, very, very weak, unable to communicate with anybody, well, you realise as well that it won't last. It can't last. Not even COVID can last. It comes and it goes. And if you're fortunate, you're still alive at the end of it. Thought did pass through my mind when I was at that retreat. Maybe this is it. I didn't actually think that, but I thought, well, you never know. I mean, at my age, I'm 74, with cancer, and COVID on top of it. It's not a good mix, really. But while I'm at it, I mean, this is another thing which is worth mentioning, that there's also a sort of an amusing dimension to this. There were moments where I was completely incapacitated. I just started laughing. I don't know why. It just, the whole thing seemed so mad. It seemed so silly. It seemed so laughable that I'd got myself in this situation. There's a funny side to everything if you look for it. If you read my book, you'll find out more about that. But anyway, I better not plug it anymore myself. Thank you very much for plugging. I didn't expect that this evening. I'm glad I came. So, anyway, I've gone somewhat off the track from the one I thought I was going down, but never mind. So wisdom starts with your experience. It starts with you trying to see what's really going on in your life, in your mind. And it takes a fair amount of honesty to do that. And I think that's, when you meditate though, you can't get away from it. Especially if you go away on your own into a solitary retreat. And that's just you, the environment, and your mind. And that takes some getting used to, because it's not always pleasant. But it's always ultimately rewarding because you get to know yourself better. You get to see your patterns more clearly because they're there, confronting you. You can't get away from them. It's a very, very useful thing to do. Not just yet, but when you've been on a few of our retreats, maybe if any of you ever get ordained, I hope some of you will, that you might consider doing something like that. But just sort of having the space to sort of relax and see what is going on in your mind in a deep way, that gives the sort of supportive conditions to the arising of wisdom. But we can help that process by engaging in specific reflections. About 10 years ago now, maybe a bit less, I went on my longest ever solitary retreat. I was away for 9 months, completely on my own, in the Spanish mountains. And at a certain point, I became very anxious. I didn't know where the anxiety had come from. It just welled up. I wasn't surprised because that seems to be part of my natural makeup. And the anxiety became quite pronounced, became intense fear. So what do you do with that? Well, all you can do, all I did in that situation was reflect, or let's pass through my mind traditional Buddhist reflections. I am not my physical body. I am not my mental state. So this, of course, implies there's something beyond the physical body, even beyond mental states. Ultimately, that is the state of enlightenment, I would say. But these sort of reflections help to calm the sort of reaction. Because one of the most fatal things we can do, and we do it nearly all the time, is identify with our immediate experience and think, that's me. It's not a conscious process, but it happens. So that if you get, for example, if you get into a particularly bad state of mind, let's say you're overcome by anxiety, it's very difficult to see how that's going to come to an end when you're immersed in it. It feels like it'll go on forever. But you have to reflect. You can reflect, I am not my mental state. In other words, I'm not my immediate experience. Experience shifts and changes all the time. In other words, it's subject to impermanence. Thank goodness. The positive side of impermanence. Things are not fixed, which means that things can always change for the better. They're going to change anyway, but if we engage positively with our experience, we can transform it. I hope you all had something of that sort of experience. You've done the Metta-Bhavana practice. Hopefully you have you've been able to see that maybe you're a little bit more positive, a little bit less prone to irritation, or whatever your particular vices are. Irritation was certainly one of mine, and can still be. But at least you can reduce that. You can work against it, and you can become more patient. Because irritation is a manifestation of impatience, really. And that way you can transform your experience, and we can keep doing that on and on and on. And ultimately, especially if you reflect on the nature of this experience, you can permanently change yourself for the better. So that gives you a taste of wisdom. Maybe gives you a taste of my approach to wisdom in my own life. I'm certainly not a paragon of wisdom. I'm not trying to pull one over you, but I know that I've made some movement in that direction. I think I can honestly say that after 50 years of practice, I can see things a little bit more clearly, with the emphasis very much on the little bit. But even that's worth it. So, have you any questions? Yep.
When you would go on solo retreats, would it impact the way that you relate to other people?
When I go on a solitary retreat?
Yeah.
When I come out, for sure, because sometimes solitary retreats can be quite difficult. I've had a few difficult ones. I've had some very good ones. Well, I mean, less difficult ones, let's say. But I think all solitary retreats I've done have had a very positive impact upon me, because you come out a bit more aware of yourself, and that inevitably has it affects the way you relate to others. Unfortunately, you can't hang on to the benefits of a solitary retreat for too long, like any retreat, because you find yourself in different circumstances back in the city, where there may be a lot of pressure on you for one reason or another, and all the stresses of city life, and maybe so clearly you just can't hold on to that experience all the time, but it will slowly change you. All these small changes that happen through meditation practice, going on any retreat, even just coming regularly along to a class like this, you can keep some of them. They'll stick with you. You do the Metta-Bhavana practice every day, well, I would expect that you become more generous, you become kinder, and less prone to reacting from anger or impatience or what have you. I'd be very surprised if that didn't happen. I could see that it happened to me when I first started doing it. 50 years ago, I can see what impact it's had on people that I've taught regularly over the years. It's quite tangible.
Okay, because I mean, the reason I asked is, especially like in the last few years because of COVID and lockdown, a lot of people have been very negatively impacted by being on lockdown and being socially isolated.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between going on a solitary retreat with meditation and Buddhism?
Okay.
And
Right. Well, if you're isolated, it's not your choice, usually, is it? Well, I mean, in the context of a pandemic, I mean, you may sort of cooperate with what's demanded of you, but it wouldn't be your first choice. It wasn't mine. But if I go into solitary retreat, that's my choice. No one made me go there. You know what I mean? It was my choice. Even now, I don't have to go on solitary retreat. I choose to go on solitary retreat because I know how much it benefits me. So that's a big difference. So there's nothing, there's nothing to resist against that you don't feel it's been imposed upon you. And I think that will inevitably affect the nature of your experience. But I think that for many people, the isolation they experienced as a consequence of COVID must have been quite devastating because they're not used to being on their own. They don't want to be on their own. They like to be with their friends. Of course, everybody does. You want to be able to go out and do the things you normally do, but suddenly you can't do that. Whereas going into a solitary retreat is very different indeed. You've chosen to do it, and so the whole quality changes. It's difficult sometimes, but it's wonderful at other times. It's a real mix of things. Yeah. Peter? Yeah.
I wanted to ask more about how to be wise when you're immersed in negative experiences like anxiety and things like that. I come up against that quite a lot.
Yeah, I think many people do. Yeah.
Very difficult to not think that everything's ending, sort of thing. So could you just maybe talk a little bit more about that? At least your direct experience and process if you're coming up against things like. Is there any tricks?
Well, I mean, the trick that I employed was precisely what I told you. I knew of these traditional reflections. I employed them, and I could see that it did calm my mind. But I also knew that it wasn't going to last because I'd been through this before. I mean, the very first solitary retreat I went on, I experienced intense fear. It started almost from the first day for about a week until I finally I don't know how I found a way through. I remember what happened. I was lying in bed at night in a cottage in Wales in December, pretty gloomy. Didn't see the sun for the whole month. And there was some noise downstairs. I knew perfectly well it was a mouse. But the noises made by mice downstairs, when you're upstairs in the dark, get magnified. Someone's broken in. It was absurd. And I knew it was absurd, but this fear just welled up. It's almost as if I had nothing to do with it. It just came from the depths. And I just sat bolt upright without thinking about it and bawled out, "I don't care if there's anyone there." And the whole thing just subsided. That was a rather dramatic experience, but I've had equivalents. You just find things in the moment to do. You trust in your intuition. You can always find a way around these things if you're smart. But I think that the main thing is just letting it in, but understanding it's not going to last. It can't last because nothing does. It will eventually pass. But that's a very difficult thing when you, as I've said before, it's a very difficult thing when you're in the middle of it to sort of see that clearly.
Yeah, it seems to me the hardest thing is letting it in, because it's when I realise I'm pushing away at things that actually that's what's causing a lot of the suffering.
It doesn't help. It really doesn't. I think you're right. I'm not sure that it causes a lot of suffering. It certainly makes the suffering more intensely felt.
Yeah.
As soon as you relax with it, it can very quickly cease to be a problem. But that's not an easy thing to do. There's a great Buddhist medieval teacher called Padmasambhava who once simply said, only relax. Of course, I've mentioned this many times when I've been teaching, only relax. Now that's a lesson it took me nearly 50 years to learn. But of course he means relax within the mind, ultimately, because that's the only real relaxation. But if you can only relax, then yes, how do you learn to relax? Well, that's why you come here, why you do the meditation practices you're doing. They will eventually have that kind of effect. They'll relax the mind. They calm the mind down, which is another way of putting it. But you've got to relax deeply within the mind. There are things you need to let go of. And it'll be different for all of us. However, I think what we're going to do now, I'd like us to finish with a bit more meditation, is I'd like us to do the third stage of the mindfulness of breathing. And then when I ring the bell, I'd like you to reflect upon something. And maybe just take a few moments now to reflect upon something which has happened to you in the course of the past week, which you would preferred hadn't happened. It might be something very simple, like you got stuck on the central line, on a stationary train in the rush hour, in the heat, and your mind started racing. When are we going to move? Something which is really unpleasant like that, and this happened to someone I know last night. Just reflect on the fact that happened, and then try to sort of just try to see, well, that is the nature of life. You can't avoid these kind of experiences, not ultimately in this kind of world. So just try to see that life is not perfect. Well, yeah, it's obvious, but life is unsatisfactory, in other words. Just try to reflect upon that. Now, if you find that difficult, or if you find that it's counterproductive, if you find yourself responding with some kind of negative emotion, it might be fear or anxiety or whatever, don't do it. Just continue to watch the breath, because that's all you're going to be doing in the first stage. If you feel this is not going to help you, just watch the breath for the whole 10, 12 minutes, however long it is. Okay? And see how you get on. So after about 5 minutes or so, I'll ring the bell and I'll just remind you of what to do. So closing your eyes. And bring your attention onto the breath. Just feeling it come in, feeling it leave the body. And allowing its natural rhythm to calm your mind. want to, if you are ready, just reflect that life is of its very nature unsatisfactory. Even just dwell upon that word. Unsatisfactory. 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 reflection. And just sit for a few moments. So that's it for this evening. Hopefully see you all again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.